Imagine a giant 1,200-year-old biology textbook, but the pages aren't made of paper.
Right. Definitely not paper.
No, instead they are massive, intricately carved blocks of dark volcanic rock, and they're stacked high in the middle of this lush, misty tropical jungle in central Java.
It is such an incredible visual, honestly.
It really is. And if you were to walk along its corridors, you'd see, over 2,000 relief panels just wrapping entirely around the stone structure.
Yeah, and when you look closely at the sheer volume of data carved into that stone, calling it a textbook isn't, well, it isn't even a metaphor.
No, not at all.
It is quite literally an encyclopedia of an entire ancient ecosystem.
Exactly. So the monument we are talking about today is Borobudur. And if you're familiar with it, you likely know it as the world's largest Buddhist temple, right?
Right, this stunning 9th-century spiritual marvel built by the Mataram kingdom.
Yeah, but our mission today is to completely change how you view this structure. Because when you layer recent botanical analyses of the temple's courtyard reliefs with detailed research into ancient Javanese agroforestry, a completely different picture emerges.
It really does. It flips the whole script.
It does. We aren't just looking at a place of worship here. We are decoding Borobudur as a stone herbarium.
A stone herbarium, yeah.
Basically a highly accurate paleobotanical database.
Precisely. The spiritual significance of the site is undeniable, obviously, but sitting right beneath the surface of all that religious iconography is a biological time capsule, just hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight, yeah.
We are talking about a permanent physical record of exactly what the natural world looked like in 9th century Java, and it's preserved with, honestly, scientific precision.
And what's fascinating is how we are accessing this information today. We are pulling from an incredibly dynamic stack of sources.
Oh, it's a great stack today.
Right. We've got structural and botanical analyses of the temple's native flora, notes on the kingdom's agroforestry, and the proceedings of the International Seminar on Nusantara Heritage.
Which is such a cool resource.
It is. That seminar focuses heavily on how extracting this ancient latent knowledge can actively inspire sustainable design in modern society. So we're really crossing the lines between archaeology, botany, and, future-focused ecological engineering.
It's a perfect synthesis, really.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why Borobudur serves as a biological database, we first have to examine the staggering scientific accuracy of the 9th century stone carvers.
Oh, right. The artisans known as the Silpin.
The Silpin, yes. Now, I have to push back a little here playfully, because if we are calling this a highly accurate biological database, weren't ancient carvings usually just, stylized or generic tree shapes?
That's the assumption, yeah.
Right, how can we possibly know what specific species these are 1,200 years later, especially on porous volcanic rock that's been battered by monsoons?
It's a completely valid skepticism. You expect a millennium of water erosion to blur the lines between a specific leaf structure and just a wavy line.
Exactly, just decorative swirls.
But this is an exact science. What's fascinating here is the morphological perfection the Silpin achieved. They were brilliant observers of nature. The taxonomy is just baked into the proportions.
Wow.
Let's look at the lotus, for example, scientifically known as Nelumbo nucifera.
A plant that obviously carries massive sacred weight in Buddhism. You expect them to carve it everywhere.
Right, but they didn't just carve a symbolic generic flower shape to get the religious point across. They carved its exact anatomy. Botanists can point directly to the peltate leaves in the stone.
Peltate meaning
the stem attaches perfectly to the center of the leaf, like an umbrella, rather than at the base.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and they captured the highly specific, multi-petaled blooms and the distinct seed pods. Even over the 1,000 years of weathering, the structural geometry of Nelumbo nucifera is undeniable.
That's incredible. And I was actually looking at the carvings of the Bodhi tree to Ficus religiosa, the tree under which the Buddha achieved enlightenment.
Yes, a very important one.
And what struck me was how the carvers captured the exact evolutionary adaptations of the leaves. They didn't just carve a heart shape, they included the extended drip tips.
Which is such an incredibly specific detail to include in a medium as unforgiving as andesite.
Right. And for anyone who hasn't spent time in a rainforest, a drip tip is essentially a built-in gutter system for a leaf.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's this evolutionary trait designed to shed heavy tropical rain as quickly as possible. Because if the water pools on the leaf, the weight could snap the branch.
Or the constant moisture could grow harmful fungi that would just kill the plant.
Exactly. So the fact that a 9th-century carver noticed that specific biological function and took the time to painstakingly chip that delicate, elongated tip into hard rock, it just changes the whole context.
It really does.
It's like an ancient high-res photograph carved in rock long before cameras even existed, a snapshot of the exact environment they lived in.
And that blueprint extends far beyond individual plants, too. Once botanists realized that the silpin were operating with this level of taxonomic accuracy, they realized they could zoom out.
Oh, like looking at the wider landscape.
Exactly. If the individual leaves are accurate, then the spatial relationships between the plants are likely accurate, too. So now that we know the carvings are botanically accurate, we can explore where these plants were placed.
Right, how ancient Javanese people landscaped their sacred spaces.
Yes. So researchers looked at the Kamanhatu and Rupatatu levels of the temple, specifically the Kamarwibhanga, Lalitavistara, and Jataka Avadana reliefs.
And out of all those, they analyzed about 400 separate panels, right?
Right. 400 panels analyzed, and they found 48 depictions of sacred buildings. But the real breakthrough was that 24 of those panels featured meticulously detailed courtyard landscaping.
So they weren't just carving a building floating in empty space, they carved the whole environmental context.
Exactly. And within those 24 courtyards, botanists identified 20 distinct plant types.
Wow, 20 types just in the courtyards.
Yeah, and what's really revealing is how they divided their planting strategies based on landscape function. They had two main categories, Penado, which means shade, and Pengius, which is decoration.
So function versus form.
Exactly. So for Penna the shade, they identified 11 different types, including the mango tree, the duku tree, and the kiban.
And these trees have incredibly dense, wide-reaching canopies, right?
They do. In the reliefs, you can actually see the sculptors using these broad canopies to shelter the human figures carved beneath them. They were deliberately creating microclimates to protect people from the tropical sun.
That is highly intentional environmental design.
It is. And then for the Pengius, the decoration, they identified 8 types chosen for aesthetics, like the Asoka tree and tall coconut palms used to vertically frame the buildings.
But within all this organized landscaping, there's one concept that I find absolutely fascinating. The Kalpataru or Kalpatha, the mythical Javanese wishing tree.
Oh yes, the tree of life and divine provision.
Right, and you'd think, okay, it's a wishing tree, so it's a made-up abstract shape. But the sculptors didn't do that. This is where ancient Javanese magical realism meets hard botany.
It's such a brilliant synthesis.
It is. They physically mapped this mythical wishing tree onto real identifiable shade trees like the Bodhi and the Dadap tree.
Scientifically known as Erythrina variegata.
Exactly. So they carved the biologically accurate leaves of the Dadap, but then layered the myth over it. They carved sacred umbrellas hovering in the foliage and receiving pots beneath the branches to catch blessings.
They really grounded the divine in the familiar. The trees that provided them with physical shade were the exact same trees they believed connected them to the divine.
Which brings us from the aesthetics of the temple to the broader survival of the civilization. Because here's where it gets really interesting.
Right, definitely.
The carvings don't just show gardens. They are basically a manual for ancient food security and agroforestry.
Yeah, when you step back, it transforms from a botanical catalog into an agricultural ledger in stone. Over 40 distinct species have been positively identified across the temple complex.
And these weren't just decorative, these were the foundation of the Javanese diet.
Right. The Mataram kingdom wasn't practicing monoculture. They utilized complex, multi-layered companion planting. They engineered a highly advanced agricultural system.
And a perfect example of that is the jackfruit tree. Artocarpus heterophyllus.
Yes, the jackfruit carvings are incredible.
They are beautifully carved, demonstrating this botanical phenomenon called cauliflory, where the massive fruits grow directly on the main woody trunk instead of on the tips of branches.
Which is a vital adaptation because a mature jackfruit can weigh 80 or 90 pounds.
Right. If that grew on a twig, the branch would instantly snap.
Exactly. And the Silpin carved these massive textured jackfruits clinging right to the central trunks.
And alongside those complex carbs, they also carved banana plants, the Musa species, and the Lontar palm, Borassus flabellifer.
And the Lontar palm is a crucial piece here. It shows how multi-use this agroforestry was. The sap was tapped for sugar. The massive leaves were used as literal writing material for their manuscript.
Oh, right, the Lontar leaves.
Yeah, and the timber was used for construction. So this ecosystem provided calories, structural materials, and the medium for their written language.
All from the same managed plot of land.
Exactly.
So what's insight here is that this proves the 9th-century Mataram kingdom wasn't just passively foraging for food, they were ecological engineers.
They were actively designing an ecosystem rich in complex carbohydrates and vitamins, capable of sustaining a massive society.
I mean, you don't build the world's largest stone temple on an empty stomach.
No, you definitely don't. You build it on the back of a hyper-efficient, managed agricultural system.
Okay, so why should you, the listener, care about a 1,200-year-old carved jackfruit today?
It's a good question.
It connects directly to our modern environmental challenges. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to talk about shifting baseline syndrome.
Right. Shifting baseline syndrome. It's a fascinating cognitive blind spot.
It really is. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so essentially it's the idea that every generation perceives the environment they grew up in as the normal baseline. Even if that environment is actually severely degraded compared to 50 years ago, we just accept our current experience as the standard.
Because our collective memory is so short.
Exactly. Over centuries, we lose track of what a truly thriving native ecosystem is actually supposed to look like. If you walk into a forest in Java today, you might see a lot of green and think it's pristine, but it might be dominated by invasive species.
Right, with massive losses in native biodiversity. And normally, without a time machine, ecologists can't prove what's missing.
But that is exactly why Borobudur is so critical. Because there were no cameras back then, Borobudur acts as a hard, physical, ecological baseline.
An irrefutable ledger.
Yes. Because the carvings are so rigidly accurate, scientists can track exactly which native species have survived, which have vanished, and how the tropical landscape has evolved over a millennium of human intervention.
Wow. So what does this all mean? Tying this ecological data back to the Nusantara Heritage Seminar source, they explain that masterpieces like Borobudur hold what they call latent knowledge.
Latent knowledge. It's such a powerful phrase.
It is. It means the harmony of the environment, art, and society carved into these stones is meant to inspire the development of tolerant, inclusive, and sustainable designs in our modern era.
Right, because they didn't separate the city, the farm, and nature like we do today. They integrated the rain, the shade trees, the food supply, and their theology into one seamless design.
Nature wasn't just a backdrop, it was the sacred space itself.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this journey, we've discovered that Borobudur is simultaneously a spiritual map, a botanical encyclopedia, an agroforestry manual, and an ecological time machine.
It really validates the idea that knowledge of the past is our absolute best tool for navigating the future.
It really is. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. If we were to build a massive stone monument today, something meant to capture the ecological baseline of our current world, what plants would we choose to immortalize?
That's a heavy question.
It is. What would our stone herbarium tell scientists 1,200 years from now about how we treated our environment?